recently had a kid ask me, who made God? And that's a question that comes up. Kids, everybody asks that at some point. Sometimes they ask it as adults, who made God? And of course, I was talking to a child, so I gave the child answer something along the lines of, no one made God. God just always existed, and maybe that was satisfying. Maybe it wasn't. But that's a question that adults wrestle with too. Who made God? And the fact is, if somebody made God, nobody made God. If somebody made God, then who we call God isn't God. It's this being that made God. But then you'd say, who made the being that made God? Well, if somebody made that God, then there's a bigger God. And if somebody, who made that God? If there's a bigger God that made him and a bigger God that made him. And you run into a problem if you do that long enough, because that sets up an infinite regression. And infinity has some problems. Namely that you can't get to the end of it. There's either an infinite series of gods, which is a logical problem, or there is one, at some point, somewhere, you get to the end of the chain, and that being is God. So who we worship as Christians is God, the head creator of all things. God would have to be uncreated. And this goes into why I think that God, at least a God that is consistent with the Bible, must exist. Whether or not we Christians have it right and the one that we worship is exactly who God is or not, a God that's at least consistent with the description of the Bible must exist. Because this God that's described in the Bible created everything. He exists outside of the creation. Now that would include space, all the area that everything is in. It would include all of the matter, the planets and stars and the dust and the moons and everything. It would include all of the energy in the universe, the stars, the heat, the electricity, the chemical energy, the mechanical energy, and it would also include the time that the universe is in. Now, I'm no astrophysicist, but my understanding is that space and time, matter, energy, they're all intertwined, so that if you didn't have one of them, you wouldn't really have the others either. They're all connected. So that time did have a beginning. And in fact, you can philosophically, I believe, make a very strong argument that time had to have a beginning. You could conceive of an infinite number of years going forward, and you could, let's say you're immortal, let's say you're in heaven, and you're moving forward each year, and it's an infinite number of years, it's an infinite life, because you never reach the end of it. You just keep going year after year after year, and no matter how long you're in heaven, you never reach the end of this infinite life. If we apply that backwards, we have a problem. Because, going forwards, we just keep traveling along it, and it's not a problem that we don't get to the end. In fact, that's quite a perk. But if we say that the universe has an infinite past, we have a really big problem, because we could never get to now, because you can't cross that infinite number of years. It doesn't matter how many millions, trillions, and billions of years that go by. Infinity is not a number. You can't count from 1 to infinity, ever. Infinity is a concept. So, we right here, sitting here watching this video, can very confidently say that the universe is not infinitely old. It does not always exist. Now, there's another philosophical way where you could say that the universe could be infinitely old, in a philosophical sense, if we don't take the year by year problem, because I forget the name of this argument. All things that come into being have a creator or have a cause. All things that start to exist have a cause. So if the universe didn't come to exist, if it didn't start, if it always existed, it wouldn't need a cause, philosophically speaking. And that's, by the way, why we don't need God to have a maker, because God didn't start to exist. And it's a little misleading to say he always existed, because I believe that God pretty necessarily has to exist outside of time, since he would have made time. So God, we could say God always existed, but it's probably more accurate just to say God exists, that he's timeless. Past, present, future, these are too limiting. To have a past is to lose a piece of yourself to the past. To have the future is to have a part of yourself you haven't realized yet, that you haven't gained. But God does not lack anything. So I believe it's more reasonable, more likely to describe God as being timeless. Just simply complete, full, perfect existence. And that's very difficult for us to comprehend because we've only ever lived in time. We are limited. But that's the problem you get. That's like a two-dimensional being trying to understand a three-dimensional being, or a cartoon trying to understand the illustrator. So where was I now? Yeah, an infinite series of years in the past, I believe, is we can make the argument that if the universe didn't begin to exist, then it doesn't need a creator. But it did need to begin to exist, because if there were an infinite number of years or seconds or minutes, whatever time unit you want to use, we couldn't get to here. We couldn't cross the infinity to get to wherever now is. So something or someone, let's just say a something, must have created everything that is a thing, everything that was created: time, matter, space, energy. Folks, that's God. Now, you could say maybe there's this universe-creating machine that's spitting out multiple universes, a multiverse, right? You could conceive of that as a theoretical construct, a theoretical possibility. But what made the universal machine? And you may turn around and say, oh, nothing made the universal machine because it always existed. But listen. Whatever you call this thing, you are giving it all of the attributes of God. If you say that our universe, or a multiverse of universes, was made by some universe-creating machine or concept, it has to be powerful. It has to be spaceless, timeless. It has to be self-existent. It would also have to be very intelligent in order to create a universe that hasn't just collapsed back in on itself, that is capable of supporting life. And we can talk about the puddle argument and how it fails in another video. This universe-creating machine is God. You can call it a machine, but you've just described God. So, who made God? Nobody made God. God is just perfectly existent. He has complete existence. There was a time when we didn't exist, and in the sense of on this earth, there's a time when we will cease to exist. Now, there's spiritual ramifications, but let's just look at earth. We are not perfectly existent. We exist, and we are real, but we are not as real as God. We were created. He wasn't. He just exists. I hope that was a little clearer than mud. And feel free to add comments if you want to add anything or disagree with me, or if you think maybe I didn't present the atheist case fairly. Let me know. I love learning new things. I'll see you in another video. Bye.